good stuff there, and actually we're going to be focusing on those 4 areas for the panel discussion now. So I'll just introduce you to the 4 panelists we've got here. So guys, if you want to step up. So we've actually interestingly got 3 companies that sort of, I guess, built for the world of web, as Eric was talking about, and one probably more traditional company, but certainly one that's innovating and looking to do a lot of work within the world of web, and actually innovating within that in terms of some of the areas that we're going to talk about. So just going down the line, so let's start at the other end. So yeah, Inina Luca, Growth Director at Skyscanner at that end. So she was previously Just Eat, I believe, Global Growth Marketing Director, and Hotels.com, MBA from Wharton, and it says you speak 4 languages as well. So I think language is actually a point here, that lots of people seem to speak lots of languages. But, and then David Pugh, who's Marketing Director of Hyundai UK. David's worked in the auto industry from what I can see all the way through, so General Motors, Saab, Jaguar Land Rover, and then for the last 3 years Hyundai as well. And then Emily, who's EU Marketing Director of Delibveroo, so previously Amex, before that. And then lastly Veronica, who's co-founder and head of marketing for Esmee, who launched 2 or 3 years ago. I don't know if everyone's seen the rabbits everywhere at the moment, all over London. Well, I certainly have. I don't know if it's just because we're talking to each other, but previously RBS, Structured Finance Innovation and Managing. So we're just going to have a discussion, really, panel discussion around each of the 4 areas. There's a particular initiative which Hyundai are working on at the moment, which I'd like David to talk a little bit more about, called Click to Buy, which is really about Hyundai, whilst not taking over the dealer's responsibility or relationship, is starting to have a direct relationship between the brand and the consumer. So David, if you want to, it'd be good if you could just talk a little bit more about Click to Buy, maybe a bit of the background, and then how the rationale behind it, I guess, and also the point around having that importance of having that direct connection.
Okay. First thing to say is I wish we were clever enough to realise that that's why we did it, because the direct connection never was the end objective. What we were actually trying to do was all the old-fashioned stuff that Eric had on the left-hand side of the chart. So we saw a consumer need that wasn't being met, and we said, we're going to, old-school marketing, we're going to meet a consumer need or a want. Maybe we're box 2, and not quite as stupid as I thought. So box 2, because the process, people hate the process of buying a car. Particularly women in the showroom really hate the process of buying a car. And it takes forever, and there's no transparency in the information, and we just thought we can use technology to fix that, and actually you can put everything through an app, through a website, which sounded really easy. When you get into it, particularly when you get into the financing and part exchanging a car, actually it's incredibly hard to do. But anyway, we built the first complete end-to-end system. So you can buy a car in about 120 seconds, including trading in your old one and working out the financing in your one. If you want to do it properly, you should probably spend a little bit longer thinking about it. But anyway, and so and that's basically why we did it. We would just try and make the process better, use technology to make the process better. And a bit like the domino thing, make it slick, make it easy. The byproduct, which we didn't really anticipate at the time, was until then, all the consumer interaction takes place in the showroom with the dealers. We never connect directly with the consumers. We attempt to, because we put our ad on the TV and there's a guy, always a guy, driving a car on a mountain road looking pleased. And then the end, logo. And we never had that direct connection. Suddenly now, through Click to Buy, we are connected to consumers. So for example, like Domino, we can now see what they want to buy because they're ordering it. And actually our electric small SUV that we recently launched, we only sell through Click to Buy, and we're sold out for the whole of this year with no marketing and no incentives. And so we've taken a leaf out of somebody else's book, who shall remain nameless. But actually what we're discovering is we're only scratching the surface of what you can do with this stuff, because now we've got that direct end-to-end connection. And the next thing we've done is we've built 160 different versions of Click to Buy, and we've given it to the dealers. So each dealer can now do their own pricing for all their own stock that they've got. And when you then have that capability, and then we go talk to people like Google, who are getting very excited, because on paid search now, we've never been able to connect the purchase. So if you're selling pizza or Andrex or whatever, It's a frequent purchase that people do regularly, and you can sell it online. So you can, the whole end-to-end chain, you can see behavior and purchase. These people purchased, what did they do before they purchased? Right, marketing, I can go and find people like that and I can use data. We've never been able to join the two ends of the circle. Now we can. So, and with the dealers, they know that somebody is looking for a red car within 3 miles of their dealership, and they have a red car, and they can now serve an ad to the consumer that says, I've got a red car for sale, click this button. And for the first time, we are completely connected end to end. And at the moment, we think the right way to do it is to involve the dealer network, because we're sort of economically and legally tied into them. But actually, what it means is we've back to the wall thing. We've taken the walls down, and we've said, instead of trying to be protective and build our own little private network and cut everybody else out, let's open the whole thing up, let everybody in. And it's been an interesting journey. I think we're still at the very start of it. We have no idea where it's going to go.
So but
we'll learn a lot on the way.
Why would it take an entire industry that long if we know that everybody's pain point is the threat of spending a Saturday morning or afternoon at a dealership? You know, everybody hates it for 100 years. So why is it that an industry? Why now? You know, I'd be curious what you say. Why now? Why does it take the industry 100 years to figure that out? I mean, it's been a problem forever.
So I think the answer is we've all known. It's back to let's use Tesla as an example again. I think you get inertia and vested interest that stops you doing something. So for example, the autopilot on Tesla is very clever. There is an amazing video of a Mercedes driving itself in an urban environment, and it's going down a road, there's a bus coming the way, and there's a cyclist. And there's an engineer sitting in the car with his hands an inch from the wheel, ready to grab it, and the car drives down the road, it sees the cyclist, it slows down, it waits, the bus goes past, and then it pulls out around the cyclist and it carries on again. That video was taken years before Tesla launched autopilot. But if you've got the risk, you've got millions of cars out there, you've got the big brand, you've got so much to lose, to jump in and put that technology on the market is a big step. If you're Tesla, you've only sold like 100 cars, you're a complete new starter, you've got good financial backing, you can take the risk. And for us, so what we've done is we've brought the dealers along with us in the journey, and interestingly, our North American arm are doing something very, very similar. And it's, I think, because we are still somewhat, we're now the 5th biggest car company in the world, I think, our group, but we still view ourselves as a challenger brand. We're a small brand that's growing, we're trying to catch up the big guys. So we're still in a position where we're kind of okay to innovate and take a risk and accept that we're going to learn on the way. And I think that's half the benefit, particularly again through connecting in this way with consumers, is test and learn, test and learn. Yeah. And that's kind of a mode that we are probably more comfortable with than some of the other big established incumbents.
That's great. I think certainly a lot of what you talk about there goes through all 4 of those areas, I think, in terms of that virtuous circle of learning and listening to pain points and keeping it going all the way through. It'd be interesting, Emily, from the other perspectives, obviously from your brand's perspective, you've kind of come at it from the other point of view in that you guys are owning the customer relationship more than the restaurants who traditionally did before. And obviously there's been some conflict over time with that point. It'd be interesting just to get your point of view of how you look at it from the other perspective of saying, well, we have the direct connection and actually the traditional creators of your product don't.
I mean, you know, the question there is why does it require Delibveroo? Why is it not one of the existing logistics companies that have an infrastructure, that have, you know, postal services and everything? Wouldn't they be in a better position to leverage what Delibveroo does, you know?
That's a really interesting question. I don't have familiarity with the logistics infrastructure of some of the more traditional players. But you
ignore them, isn't it good?
But what I think is fascinating about our business model is it's a 3-sided marketplace with 3 different constituents that we care about very deeply, and they at times have conflicting interests and needs. And so one of our biggest operational challenges is to figure out how we keep all of those groups happy in a way that ultimately adds value to the overall ecosystem and to them individually when some of those needs may be in conflict. I think the classic example for us and a big insight for me was how subject we are to the vagaries of weather. It turns out when it's really rainy and cold, all of you want to order food. None of our drivers want to be on the road, and the restaurants may not have the staff to cook the food. So figuring out how we can find value propositions that enable us to cope in those circumstances, whether it's surge pricing for riders to make it more attractive, restaurant selection in the app that sort of prioritizes restaurants that have greater capacity so that our consumers are not facing a disappointing experience. We're learning very much in real time, I mean, down to the second and in a way that can be overwhelming, what signals we need to listen to and which ones we can attend to. And then over time, we're certainly always evolving the proposition and the way that we go about delivering that value.
So you're saying you almost take over some of the role of the restaurants, that they could never do that on an individual basis?
Absolutely. There's a volume of insight that you get with scale when you see the same pattern repeated over not just a particular city, but a country and then multiple countries. And that's just a greater number of data points than any one individual restaurant typically can have access to.
I think because my observation is obviously seeing the restaurants are turning round to, I know you've just launched a benefit system and a help for them as well to be able to kind of aggregate buying centrally for things like health insurance, for things like there's a whole list, aren't there, of things you can do, Wi-Fi buying, things like that, centralised buying basically, so actually giving a benefit from a central point of view. So having that direct connection, giving a benefit to the third party, I think is really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. We're very focused on making sure that we're providing value to each of the partners in our marketplace. That's really the only way we can ensure the health of the ecosystem.
What I find so interesting is that if you're a logistics company like, let's say, UPS or Federal Express, you say, we have so many planes, we can deliver you overnight, our value proposition to you is X. And look at, we are globally delivered overnight, whatever, definitely, positively, absolutely, whatever. The way you speak is Emily, you say, we are marketplace, we have 3 constituents. Our value proposition is not to the customer, we have a value proposition to the restaurant or the bakery. And
the customer, always the customer.
Yeah, that's right. So there are 3 value propositions involved, and you sort of almost balance that. And the branding is not about the number of people that are driving. The value proposition, what is the value that I'm giving to you, and by orchestrating that network in a way.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's kind of nice.
The other area I was going to talk about, I think, from your point of view, Veronica, for Esmee, is what I was interested in from chatting to you guys as well is how they're talking about the pain points. And it's one of the things Eric talks about, I think, within the third one, around building interactions around not just positives but negatives that people experience. And be useful and interesting to talk more about what you observe of the pain points from a business loan perspective for SMEs, and then how that evolves to be able to constantly address that.
Sure. I mean, so Esmee Loans is a pretty young company. We've only been trading for 2 years. We were born out of the premise that actually our parent, NatWest, sort of recognised that a lot of the consumers were going to the likes of Funding Circle. So we were sort of tasked with, come up with a loan product. And actually, when we started to get under the hood of it, the issue was that it wasn't about just putting a product a little bit quicker to the market. We actually started to deconstruct the entire loan process. And when we went out and spoke to friends, customers, etc., it was quite interesting that everyone is so happy to get a credit card, personal credit card, like one click, no issues. People have loads in their wallets. You say business loan and it's like deer in headlights, fear, horror. The two are pretty similar. It's an unsecured loan. So actually that was really kind of the birth moment of why is a business loan feared? And it's typically feared because of the big bad bank or prehistoric conceptions, and actually the notion of it being an entire hassle and it doesn't really work. So what we worked on, and actually data and analytics was the heart of it, was to completely deconstruct the loan process and really think about what do you actually have to do to obtain money, what is the customer experience to get what they need, and what is the actual product that they're really looking for. So let's work around creating a true solution for them, which has led to our kind of current proposition.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I know we talked about is how quickly that can be done, anecdotally.
Yeah, so we kind of, the quickest we've done it so far and continue to process is, from starting a new application to money out the door, 29 minutes.
Yeah.
How many months?
29 minutes. And it's not about, going in or speaking to anyone or getting on the phone. It's just, the whole premise is actually don't ask questions you don't need to know answers to. You make it as easy as, a couple of simple questions, scrape information automatically, and give them what they need, and,
And I think the two interesting bits within that, I think, as you said, is the ability to scrape from the point of view of taking lots in from your API of all this information that can come in quickly, and then the ability to kind of action it quickly as well, frictionlessly, I guess.
Yeah, so it's using technology to become the enabler, as opposed to just leveraging the concept of we've got some cool tech and we're going to put it out to market. Actually use that technology to drive a truly brilliant experience for the customers.
Which brings me very neatly onto my point around Skyscanner. So again, I'm jumping around between some of these areas, but I've always been a big fan of Skyscanner. We talked about it earlier, I know David was as well, that spend ages sort of dreaming and looking at various places you can go, and I've loved the evolution from pure flights into kind of much broader areas. It'd be really interesting to talk a bit more about how focused on the consumer it is, because I think the point I've always seen is it's built for the traveller. It wasn't built for the airlines, it wasn't built like the other online travel agents. It was very much focused on who is the end consumer, what do they want, and how do we constantly innovate to make sure that we deliver against that.
Yeah, I think that that's definitely the case. I think we put the consumer at the forefront of what we're trying to do in the product that is consumer facing. So we think, first of all, what is the customer trying to do and how they're going to achieve that and how we can support them through that. So some of us go, and I think we were discussing this earlier, like, okay, I have this trip in mind, how do I make it happen? But we also have a lot of people that go and say, well, I have kids, like half term is coming, where do I go? Or I know that I roughly want to go on holidays around those dates, but so there's different kind of customer journeys that we try to work around how we facilitate those customer journeys and what's the supporting information and value that we need to drive to the travelers in that process. And I think that one of the things, as you were mentioning, is it's a very fragmented ecosystem. So you go to one place to get your flight, a different place to get your car, a different place to get your hotel, and at the end of the day when you're going traveling, I mean, sometimes you go and stay with family and friends, sometimes you go in a car, sometimes you don't, but having one place where you can actually do all those different things and have all your information stored in one place really makes it a lot easier from a traveler's perspective. So I think we try to think about the pain points and the tasks that the customer is trying to do when they come to our site and trying to support them throughout that process.
And I think the one of the things I was reading about was the integration of the APIs or the information from third parties as well, and making that a more frictionless experience. So looking at how you can integrate British Airways site into your site so people don't feel like they're being taken away from that process.
I think there has been a shift even when I was back at hotels.com, I think that has been a shift in terms of how the meta players came and kind of disrupted the market of OTAs and took a little bit of that away to give the customers a higher sense of being able to control the pricing and making sure that they were getting the best deal. But I think it was a high friction for a customer to come to one place and then go to a different place. And even though we always try to make the experience as seamless as possible, there's a lot of times that something is broken in between. Your dates were not right, like your airport was not right. So I think a lot of the meta players, us included, would be trying to think about how we fix that additional friction that we were introducing to the customer journey.
Yeah, and one of the last areas I was interested in as well is the degree of localization, how that's meant moving across markets. So being able to look at how different people buy in different markets must be fascinating as well.
Yes, I think that from an organizational standpoint, it's quite interesting because it's relatively easy to say I have a website, I'll go and buy an additional domain and I'll send my website to be translated. But what we really see is the way customers interact with brand and the way that they purchase is very different. So for instance, in Spain, we know travelers are more price sensitive, so how do we make them feel that they're getting the right price? We do kind of higher indexing of value propositions. In other markets, we have completely different ways of engaging with our products. So if you think about Asia, and I don't know how many of you worked in Asia, but like the way customers interact with brands is completely different because they have built-in ecosystems. So I think it's definitely a challenge for any global brand to really understand how to win locally. And it's kind of like a constant friction in our roadmaps of saying, let's build a global product, but let's also build a product that resonates with our local customers.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. One of the points, maybe it's a general question to anybody who wants to take it, but this point around this virtual cycle of learning, I know one of the points I'd read on Delibveroo was how you decrease the number of weeks it takes to get to certain 100,000 customers or a number of customers as you've gone on. How agile as an organisation do you feel you need to be able to keep ahead of that to learn from customers to constantly change?
Incredibly. I think one of the most, I'm relatively new in my journey at Delibveroo, and one of the most interesting things to me was the decision-making velocity. You know, we'll get a heads up. It's not to say that all decisions happen on this time frame, but they can happen, where you'll get a notification of a particular product change that's going to happen. And in my previous industry, it would have been like, it's going to happen in maybe 2, 3, 4 months, 6 months, a year, it'll happen. And you know, in our case, it's 3 p.m. You're told it's going to happen, and 9 a.m. the next day, it's live globally, everywhere. I'm still adjusting to that. And I think, you know, we have to use a lot of discretion in terms of the decisions that we make, and we're comfortable implementing with that timescale, and to make sure that the customer voice and the customer interest across all of our constituents is accurately reflected in that decision-making velocity. But I do love that if you get a strong enough signal and have the right intuition, you can make it happen.
Yeah, be interesting, I suppose, from Hyundai and maybe the background from NatWest RBS, how much that impacts on you, and whether that has, from Veronica, from Esmee's point of view, how that much.
Well, I guess the whole premise and foundation of Esmee was to build and launch at speed. I think we're very fortunate that actually NatWest has given us that flexibility and that freedom. But for sure, I think if we were still within the realms, I guess the walls of the bigger bank, things can't happen as quickly necessarily. But having said that, we were given the opportunity to launch Esmee. So actually that's probably a testament. I think most organizations talk about innovation and agility. I think actually that as you establish, it's quite key to ensure that you maintain that agility and speed, and how do you actually do it? As you grow bigger, processes are naturally put in place, rightfully so. But in order to keep at pace with technology, with innovation, with the new brands that are coming to market, to be honest, if it takes you longer than what you've just said, you're probably going to lose out. So you kind of have to work really hard to maintain that flexibility throughout.
I think, as Eric said, that point is as soon as consumers start to think there's a problem here, they broadcast that to everybody else, and the exponential effect becomes bigger and bigger in terms of challenges that you might.
Yeah, but I think the other thing, it's not just about the decision making, it's also how you build. So you don't, we're not believers of building a product or a service. Everything has to be modular. So that allows you to restack and give you flexibility. Because if you build a very non-flexible proposition, then actually the time that it's going to take you to break it down and change it means you probably would have missed an opportunity.
And so David, how does that work in your world as well? Obviously, it's a slightly slower process. Obviously, building a car is a hugely long process, but actually the ability to be agile in the sales process. And
it is. The other thing I think that we're slowly learning is that, again, in the old model where everything was done through the dealers, whatever feedback you got from customers, they talk to somebody in the dealership. If it only happens once or twice a day, the dealer doesn't bother picking up the phone and ringing us and telling us. So really, we got almost no information back, whereas now, actually with our friends at Gravity, we can use social listening tools in real time. If something is developing as an issue, we can immediately find out if people are talking about it in a way that we never could before. And at least that gives you the ability to respond, to know what's happening quickly and to respond quickly in a way that we never could. So again, it's just using technology to connect and to sense. And then the other thing about speed is the other thing I've learned in my career is sometimes it is genuinely better to ask for forgiveness than permission. So apologise after you've done it rather than go and find out whose job it is to tell you you're allowed to do it. That's usually quite a good way to work.
Okay. I'm aware it's 10 o'clock and we said I'll just hand over to questions to the audience if anyone has any. The guys will be around briefly afterwards for any other questions you've got. But
just a very quick one. It's about the hours of branding. So is it necessarily sequential, or will you find customers at different levels or different parts of the hour still? Because the challenge we face is to have a consistent voice, but different customers want different things. Some just want awareness, some want information, some want the emotion. But how would we maintain the consistency of our brand with customers at different phases?
Yes, well, for us at least, we think almost the left side, the wall, the ones, they are options, but we sort of work through them, and oftentimes they don't, in this day and age, are not enough to service the variety, and that's how we build in the new ways, if you will. So it's you know, if you can create a level of brand differentiation through emotion, yeah, I mean, I'll take it, you know. But I think what I hear from the panel is that process is a lot more dynamic anymore, and the process, sort of what's interesting is that world, the world of wall, if you will, it's always predicated on how you're different from somebody else. But when I look at anything that the panel just said, then not once they talked about competitors, only maybe flattering, so saying something as an example with Tesla. They always talk about how they help the journey. They sort of like never talked about how they, you know, when you asked me, when you started, you didn't say, this is how we compare to X, Y, Z. No, they said like, this is how I construct the journey. And so and the same thing with Delibveroo. It's not about how we are different from another delivery service. It wasn't even a question. The question was, how am I going to bring those three different parties, my network, if you will, my own network, together in order to create a value proposition for each one? So I think this is where, it's sort of like very similar also with Skyscanner, you know, right? So it's a cool sort of like consistent story of how it works. But I obviously have written the book called Brand Leadership years ago, and there I was a proponent of a brand as an experience, brand as an emotion, so I will not change my mind anymore on that one.
Does anyone have any other questions?
I have a question, probably mainly for Veronica. But banking is a very high-bound industry, traditionally, like the mainframes of the data, like COBOL, maybe COBOL programmers pulling out of retirement. You've got regulations, and so it's really interesting to see how banks are reacting to startups, fintech startups. Do you see your efforts feeding back in, especially your ability to connect directly with the consumer in short times? Do you see that feeding back into NatWest in any way? Like, are they creating an internal virtual cycle?
Absolutely. If anything, everything that we learn, every technology enabling point, customer pain point that we discover and will always discover in our journey, we wash back into our parents so that they can also benefit from the learnings that we have. For any bankers in the room, we're not sharing data in case anything like that. But that's actually really where, by being a separate company, means we can move quicker, find the learnings, and then bring them back in-house so that they can take them and adapt them as well.
David, what percentage of your cars is currently being sold online, and where do you expect that to grow in the next 5 years?
It depends. So depends what you mean by sold. So transacted online completely, at the moment the percentage is very low, a few thousand cars probably this year. But actually, virtually 100% of people are interacting with the web continually along that journey. And actually, another thing we've done, we've experimented with shopping centre stores in the UK, where the whole process happens digitally. About half the people that buy at those stores complete the transaction at home. So on an iPad at the couch, 10 o'clock at night, dealership's closed, and they make the decision, push the button. But 100% of them have been in the dealership. So I think the way we're looking at it is we're not looking at digital as replacing or supplanting. It's just another way of completing the journey. And actually, we're quite agnostic about whether people want to buy in the showroom or whether they want to buy online. As long as the tools give them the information that they want and allow them to get to the end point of, is this the right product for me, is it the right deal, then I've always said I don't care whether they interact and push the button online or whether they do it in the showroom, as long as I make that process as user-friendly as I possibly can. So it's either 100% or a few percent, depending on whether you care about that last press of the button.
A question over there?
Yeah, I guess this one's for Veronica. I think technology is changing so fast that I think there's a lot of them, like, especially in fintech and insurtech and that space, but it's still quite traditional. And I think probably one of the biggest things is trying to educate your different demographics of the technology that's available to the market. Like, I think, how do you go about educating those customers on the products, the new products that you've got? Like, you know, my mum, for example, what would make her go to a company like you rather than just picking up the phone and using traditional methods? How do you do that?
It's a really, really good question, actually, and something we originally grappled with, because one of the branding ideas was to explain about our clever tech. And I guess quite a lot of people talk about cybersecurity and safety, and we explored that route and then quickly put it in the bin, because actually, instead of talking to people around how clever the tech is, if you make it intuitive and easy to use, then whether you're, you know, our age or your mother's age, who I'm sure is very young, or older, it's not going to be an issue. It's about actually making the consumer feel comfortable, safe, and so intuitive that actually it is, you know, one-click type process. They don't, you know, everyone's got an iPhone these days. They don't market the technology that sits within the iPhone. They market the brilliant UX of it. And therefore, it's just so highly intuitive that most people can pick it up and use it. And that's really how we kind of go about it. So we don't necessarily focus on explaining why this is easy, or the technology that happens in the background. Of course, you can easily find out about it, make sure that everyone's comfortable with what's happening there. But really, it's about actually highlighting how hassle-free it is.
I think one of the anecdotes I was hearing about the age, the oldest age that you've loaned to.
Yeah, we actually had a fishmonger who was 80 plus, and his son originally was on the phone with him to sort of, as our customer service guys were explaining to him how you would draw down a loan. And in the end, you know, he was very comfortable going through it and ended up ditching his son on the phone. And at the end said, I can't believe I've never done this myself before. And this guy didn't have an iPhone, had never really used technology, but I kind of figured if we can navigate him, I think we're onto a good thing.
I think that, like, even in our industries, that's the kind of fascinating thing I was reading about. I never worked in the industry, but like I was reading about Lego, for instance, and how they approach like user research, and like it's literally like kids can figure it out, and that's fine. And a lot of companies have been kind of trying to understand what is kind of the toughest audience to go into, and if they can figure it out, then everyone can. But in a lot of the e-commerce companies, I feel that you're just battling an existing behavior and trying to change that behavior. So if you think about Netflix, we had Blockbuster before. It was like an established thing. You would go and buy the popcorn and the ice cream and this, and now it's just in the comfort of your home. I don't want to speak for Delibveroo, but I know that for Just Eat, of course there's competitors, but our largest competitor was the phone. And it was kind of breaking that behavior of calling your local place, discovering new flavors. So I think it's just a constant kind of trying to form new habits in people that would ideally be like easier, less frictions. It's about solving actual customer needs, but I think at the beginning they need to be educated to take that leap.
But surely that comes at a budget, right? Like that education. Like I find that is probably one of the most challenging things for companies that are trying to get a foot in, you know, a new innovative space.
I think it is tough, but it also depends on how crowded the market is. So the more crowded the market, it's kind of like a crowdsourced investment in educating people. If you're the only one in the market, then it's all on you to educate those customers.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, one of the principles we always talk about is thinking that your competition is not your competition, and challenging yourself to sort of say, is it other consumers? Is it other things that are distracting you? Is it other, is it other things that people could do in their spare time, or however else they're going to order? So it's definitely a great principle. I'm aware we've gone sort of 10 minutes over time. So if anyone's got any other final questions, then we can, one more. Come on, Steve.
I had a question for the whole panel. Really, you talked a lot about frictionless experiences, ease, absolutely right, hugely important. No one's talked about the emotional value of exchange through those experiences and how important that is, and whether that could be a differentiator. I'm thinking of Amazon, which is a hugely efficient, easy channel, but emotionally shallow and unenjoyable, actually. And I'm wondering about how important you think that kind of emotional value exchange in the e-commerce process and experiences.
I think that's fundamental to the value proposition. A lot of the research that we do is centered around understanding our customer need states and how those vary by segments, because we most fundamentally want to be able to match our proposition to those need states, and that if we're meeting a need in a way that is compelling and frictionless and all of those other things, that's what enables us to establish that greater emotional connection. You know, providing food of excellent quality to a family with a new baby, for example, establishes your relationship with that particular cohort in a way that's differentiated versus, you know, other need states.
I think actually to your point, it's in Esmee, it's not about selling the loan, it's actually selling the opportunity that finance will provide, and for some it will be because they're expanding, which is, you know, growing their own business. For others, it might be that they want to buy some new stock, as in a new coffee machine or whatever it is. So we actually try and talk about what it is that it will obtain for them and how it could make their life easier or their business easier. So actually, one of the best stories I'd had is someone borrowed some money from us and didn't necessarily repurpose that cash into stock. They hired an additional staff member, and it gave the founder an opportunity to go away on holiday for the first time in 5 years. Now that to me was a far more powerful story, and having been set up, you know, working on setting up Esmee, I could really relate to that. So actually that loan, yes, he hired a staff member, but really gave him really valuable time with his family.
Great, well, thanks very much. We're all going to be around for a bit if everyone wants to stay for a bit. There's still a bit more food and coffee and things. I think we've got the place for another half an hour or so. So thanks very much to the four of you for attending. Thank you, Eric, and hopefully all agree it's been a great discussion, and let's continue it afterwards.